Hello, welcome to the Recognitive channel where we are about learning and relearning. This is a personal project that is sponsored by my free time. A mistaken judgment that people often make is underestimating how much a situation can determine someone's behavior. This error occurs when we think another person's action tells us something meaningful about their personality, when instead anyone placed in their shoes would have acted the same way. For example, one might see people in anxiety-inducing situations, like a bungee jumping, for the first time, and infer that they are an anxious person in general, rather than infer that they are average people in a nerve-wracking situation. Another common example is when a person arrives late to a meeting. An inference when others do it is to think of them as late or careless, but often we forgive ourselves with circumstantial arguments. Let's make something clear. Everyone falls for this, to at least a certain degree. Picture the average colleague in your office or the average student in your school. How frequently do you think they do it? Ready? Now look into yourself and write down, to what extent do you show this effect? Ready? If your number was a lower number, or in other words, if you rated others are showing this effect more than you may have fallen victim to the bias blind spot. Let's talk about the bias blind spot. In this video, we will talk about a definition of a blind spot, a description of the bias, and some research showing some interesting things about it. Then we will address how this bias has been affecting me all along. The Cambridge Dictionary defines a blind spot as an area you are not able to see, or an area which a person lacks understanding or impartiality. Actual driving blind spots are something you learn in defensive driving. Blind spots are dangerous. The definition of the bias blind spot is that most people tend to believe that on average they are less biased in their judgment and behavior than their peers. The term bias blind spot was coined by Emily Proning. In this video, I will address the research matter in another way. It seems that it has been relatively easy to observe the bias, so research focuses more on first, observing it, second, how it happens, and third, how it can be reduced. This is quite convenient as it obeys the logic I follow in the cognitive bias video series. Let's start how the bias is observed or reproduced. The bias is measured in a similar way to the introduction of this video. First, the participants read a description of each bias as an effect. Then they are asked to rate an external figure like average American, average student, in how they tend to show such effects. Then the subjects are asked to rate themselves. The delta in ratings is the bias of the biases. The biases being rated are changed in every research, depending on the purpose of the study, with the intention to see if the bias blind spot changes depending on the type of biases being rated. In these two examples, you can see that the biases tested can vary greatly. You can see also that in average, the bias blind spot is confirmed in all of them. Let's talk about how it happens. The initial idea was that this could be due to the illusion of superiority, while you would think that you are better than others. But Emily Proning and others discarded this while testing for other personality traits and the planning fallacy at the same time. The overrating effect was not observed, so it is not due to superiority delusions. It seems that the sister bias of naive realism is one of the engines behind the bias. Naive realism is a tendency to believe that our perception is the reality. We are slaves of the roulette, so we will talk about this bias in due course. We tend to think that we can understand how our brain works, that we can understand the motivational processes and the cognitive processes in our brain, how they work. The example is when you want an ice cream of a particular flavor. We think that we can understand why we are choosing that flavor, but we are only rationalizing. The reality is that in many aspects, our brain is a black box to ourselves. When you consider your perspective as real or authentic, then people that disagree with it will be regarded as biased or incorrect. Additionally, when judging ourselves, we have access introspectively to our thoughts and feelings, and this is a very rich source of information. When we judge others, we do not have access to those thoughts and feelings, and hence we are judging based on behavior, and then attaching value to those judgments as if they were introspection. This will be a little bit of touch-up on the cure. In this part, we will talk about debiasing procedures. For every bias research, there will be most likely studies and efforts to understand how to mitigate the bias. The mitigation measures are called debiasing, and I bring it up because the bias blind spot has a role to play in this. Participants were asked to relatively rank themselves versus an average Stanford student in 6 personality traits, of which 3 were positive and 3 were negative. You would like to be high in the positive and low in the negatives. After this initial assessment, the participants read a description of the better than average bias. In short words, this bias is about always rating yourself higher than the average, like you are a better driver than average. They were also told that 70 to 80% of people display this bias to make it comfortable to be part in that group. Then they asked to rate the accuracy of their assessments. To rate the accuracy, they were given 3 choices. I should be rated lower on positive traits and higher on negative traits. Second, the rating remains the same. Third, I should even revise my ratings to rate me higher on the positive and lower on the negative traits. As you can see, the first option is to recognize the bias, the second, claim objectivity, and the third, claim modesty. Please stop the video now and guess how many people changed their mind. It was 24%. Only 1/4 of the people in the study changed their mind. In other words, the others probably thought. Remember the people having an argument earlier about a solution? Well, they are now fighting about who is biased. Some argue that bringing an advisor is a good debiasing treatment. Let's bring a facilitator, so to speak. But the susceptibility to the bias blind spot will prevent you from following this advice. So the debiasing intervention will be much less effective. So apparently, we have no cure for this. Let's discuss the effects of this bias. In the studies by Irenes, Copitelli and peers, they tried to link the bias via correlation analysis to all kinds of features and traits. There was little to no correlation. So this means that this bias doesn't actively affect your decision making. All the other biases are the ones that are doing that. This is why this bias is actually meta. The bias blind spot is a meta bias. But don't think that because it is like this, it doesn't affect you or me. It does. And in ways I was not expecting. In every cognitive bias video, I am trying to assess myself in terms of how the biases affect me and give examples. Even after I learn about them, I'm struggling to find them. I will admit there might be some that I do not want to disclose, but those are the easy ones. Finding others is turning out to be very difficult. So, leaving shame aside and other things, I think that this bias and the black box effect I explained earlier partially helped me understand that I'm even fighting against my meta self. I guess I am susceptible to the bias blind spot. Let's evaluate the video. I consider that I scored a 4.5. I think I focus now less on research, but trying to understand more the point of view of these researchers. If I am rating correctly, which I am probably not, this would be the best video in the cognitive bias series so far. What do you think? Comment below. And now we turn to our roulette for the topic of the next video, and the winner is negativity bias. Wait, I have something more to say. I told you before, blind spots are dangerous. Joe Montana was a very famous quarterback in NFL American football. His career was hindered by a hit he received on his visual blind spot. When you're having disagreements or arguments with people, your stance is partly based on the fact that your intentions are good. You have no access to the other person's intentions, so to de-escalate the argument and the situation, give them the benefit of the doubt and assign, at least temporarily, these good intentions as well. Give all your focus and energy in trying to find them in others. See how it goes. As Emily Pronin said, we owe some charity in judging others' behavior by giving some weight into their intentions, and we should not assume that their intentions are so different from our own. And if we can start with that, and start with the charity of trying to find the positive intention in others, then maybe there is some hope. See you in the next episode. This is the Recognitive channel. Thank you for watching.